Species. Unite.
If we march into that village and we start trying to persecute people for using poison, something that's very illegal, but nobody's going to talk to us. We're not going to find out where the poison came from. We're not going to be able to shut anything down. We should take the approach that people are using poison because they're desperate, because they see no other alternative.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. This conversation is with Andrew Stein. Andrew is a wildlife ecologist who spent the past 25 years studying human-carnivore conflict, from African wild dogs and lions in Kenya and Botswana to leopards and hyenas in Namibia. His work has long focused on finding ways for people and predators to coexist. He is the founder of Claws, an organization based in Botswana that's working at the intersection of cutting-edge wildlife research and community-driven conservation. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for being here. I know you just got off a plane.
Yes.
So it's really nice of you to stop through.
I'm excited for the opportunity to kind of share our story and talk to you about what we do.
I want to hear about it, but first, let's talk about you. Let's go back to how you ended up this becoming your work and where it all started.
I grew up in central Massachusetts in Worcester, and I was a kid like many others, obsessed with animals. I think most kids are, and I never grew out of it. In my teens, I volunteered at a local zoo. I knew that wasn't quite what I wanted to do, but the idea of traveling to Africa, for example, just really wasn't something that I thought I had access to. And being a field biologist in particular, these are all these highly trained, specialized people. They can live in these remote places. I'd never gone camping until I was in my 20s. So I don't know. It just didn't seem like it could be a reality for me. I went to college for zoology, and then I did study abroad in Kenya, and that just blew my mind. That was it. I was fascinated by the cats most. First cheetahs, then lions, and then I saw my first leopard, and I sort of fell in love with leopards as a species. They seemed to me to be the most perfectly designed animal that exists,
Yeah.
And so I put together a proposal, scraped a little money together, was able to get to South Africa, where I was doing a study on leopard scent marking behavior. I contacted 50 zoos in America. They sent me baby food jars with leopard pee in them, put it in my parents' freezer. I was able to find a farmer that would allow me to do the project on his farm in South Africa, and I went there for 5 months.
Wait, what were you doing to leopard pee?
Reasonable question. I was very interested in the issues of conflict and coexistence, primarily. Not just ecology, what they eat, where they move. A lot of those things had already been understood pretty well, even at the time, even though leopards were probably the least well-studied of the big cats. So I was trying to look for solutions. You talk to farmers. I was talking to villagers in Kenya, and they all said leopards are a problem and we must do something about it. And I'm reading about leopards, and I'm reading about all these different kinds of deterrents that people use, flashing lights, loud noisemakers, all this crazy stuff. And the animals get scared of that, of course, but it's not a natural part of their environment. And eventually, if there's nothing really behind it, they often get habituated to these things. So as I'm reading about leopard ecology, there were several papers about the fact that they're asocial. They have territories that they have exclusive use to, but it's too dangerous to confront every intruder. If you get into a fight every time another leopard skirts your territory and you get into a physical altercation, you risk getting injured to the point where you can't hunt or dying. And so what is their natural system of communication that they use to tell neighbors that the area is occupied so that it doesn't have to come to a fight. And really what it comes down to is, yes, they vocalize, but it's primarily scent marking. So this is a system of communication leopards and many other species have evolved to understand over millennia. And so there's some signal in the scent marks that tell the neighbor about the status of that individual. And we know, like from our own species, when you're a teenager and, you're going through hormonal changes, you're in the prime of your life, you're in the later years of your life, like there are different hormones and hormone signatures that are likely expressed in different ways. And so I looked at scent marking in urine as like the ideal way of testing that idea for leopards, using a communication system that they've already evolved to understand and respect. Yeah. So then I have baby food jars of leopard pee in my parents' freezer. Yeah.
What are you doing with your pee, though, the pee that you brought?
So in all honesty, I had no idea what I was doing.
Okay.
This is the first project I'd ever actually been involved with. I had never worked for anybody before. So I wrote this little proposal, shopped it to a few people, found the one person to say yes, and went out there. I brought a couple radio collars from a white-tailed deer project in Massachusetts, from a professor at UMass who said, the study's over. I've got these extra collars. If you catch a leopard, give it a try.
This is awesome. This is a better story.
And there's all sorts of other details like leading to it. I got connected with people from the South African government that brought traps out and taught me how to set the traps. But the first thing I ever trapped in my life was a leopard, not a mouse, not a bird, not one of the most dangerous animals in the world, And that in and of itself was wild. So I get out there and, I don't know how much of a detour this is.
I don't care. This is so good. We'll get to modern times.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I guess leading up to finding this farmer, because this is kind of an important point, which was confusing to me leading up to the project. I had known from like earlier years that there was lots of research done on cheetahs. There's books been written. Lions, there's so much literature about lions. And when I saw that first leopard, I thought like, there's hardly anything on this species. It's the most widely distributed cat in the world. All sub-Saharan Africa, the Congo, through the Middle East, Southwest Asia, Iran, Iraq, the Persian leopard, India, Southeast Asia, Java, throughout China, all the way to the Russian Far East, there are leopards. And at the time, the understanding was that this was like a continuous blanket, that leopards are everywhere, in the Himalayas, in Mumbai, in the city itself, like in the desert, like everywhere. They're just so adaptable. But there was very little done on them. And I thought maybe this is the way that I could make a contribution. I read about them. I put together a scent marking proposal. And then this professor at UMass, Todd Fuller, who eventually became my PhD advisor, said, okay, you have this scent marking idea, which I think there might be something to it. You've read all the literature, was very little at the time. He said, if you're going to do a study, why don't you do it with somebody who's already studying the species? Piggyback on the work they're already doing. Don't start from scratch. It's a lot of effort. So I said, okay. And he gave me the name of a guy, Peter Jackson, not the director of Lord of the Rings, but a biologist who was the chairperson for the World Conservation Union Cat Specialist Group. This is a group of people that are like the world's expert on all species of cat. And I wrote to him and I said, I'm interested in doing this study. And he very generously wrote back, he didn't know me from anybody. He said, he gave me the name of 3 people on Earth, considering the wide range of leopards that were, to his knowledge, studying leopards. One of them was Ulis Karanth.
Oh, I know him. He's been on the show.
Yeah. Incredible tiger biologist, done tremendous work. And he wrote back and he said, opportunistically, I find stuff out about leopards, but they're really not my focus. I'm probably not the best guy for you. I said, thanks. And then there was a Japanese woman, Fumi Mizutani, who did her PhD studying leopards on farmlands in Kenya. She said, well, I finished my work. I married the rancher where I was working, and we're just raising livestock, and I'm not really studying leopards anymore. And then someone named Chris Stewart, Chris and Tilda Stewart write all these guidebooks about like tracks and signs and all this stuff. And Chris wrote back to me and he said, actually, my wife and I, we moved to Saudi Arabia. We're studying caracals. We don't really study leopards anymore. I said, according to the cat specialist group, there's not a single human being on earth, and this is 2001, studying leopards. So how could this be? So Chris Stewart put me in touch with the farmer in South Africa, and that's how I ended up there.
Why was this? Is it because they're so elusive?
Yes, and this is what I found out later. Like after I did the study, I came back to this, and it was really hard. I mean, so I was on this ranch in South Africa. I didn't have a vehicle, so I was tracking leopards on foot, with a receiver, hiking 7 to 9 hours a day, no radio, no cell phone. Nobody knew where I was going. Nobody knew when I was coming back. I was encountering spitting cobras. I was, ambling up and down rocks. If I walked 4 hours and twisted an ankle, like I'd spend the night out and who knows what happens then.
Right.
I had encounters where, I'm following tracks, like fresh tracks really closely. Then all of a sudden this bush starts to kind of move a bit and this deep growl, and I turn my receiver on and beep, beep, beep from the collar. And I just sort of slowly, didn't turn my back to it, just slowly walked away, climbed up on a rock somewhere and just took notes. And I mean, at this point I'm thinking, this is not, this is not a good idea.
No,
like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like I'm sure I'm making mistakes. People don't know where I am. Like if something bad happened, I started going a little bit crazy, talking to myself, like practically making sock puppet friends,
Yes.
Like I was at that point and I ended up coming home. And then eventually, this is 2001, eventually 2016, I become a member of the cat specialist group after doing my PhD on leopards in Namibia, doing some work on them in the Okavango in Botswana. And I led the IUCN Red List global status update for leopards, collecting information from all the experts all over the world. So I went from like this kid who didn't know anything, capturing
like walking
leopards,
around, looking
walking
for
around,
leopards.
having bushes like growl. I mean, like all this kind of crazy stuff, to like being recognized as one of the experts in the species, which was like the greatest validation and compliment, I could have ever gotten.
And it's really cool that you started by walking around with the bushes, that you had that experience, because I don't think that experience happens much anymore.
No.
We don't, on any level, right? Like
Right.
life just, everything's too easy now.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And I try to resist being the old man shaking my fist at the clouds, saying like, in my day kind of thing.
Right.
But at the time, like we didn't have satellite collars. So I had to triangulate the location of the leopards on foot. So I'm climbing up rocks and, listening for signals, not getting a signal, walking 3 hours to like the next station, listening. Okay, I get a beep. Now I have to walk over here, get a beep. And then I'm drawing on a piece of paper with a compass to figure out roughly where that animal is. And I don't know how many points I collected in that study, maybe 16 or 20. But for my lion study now, you could get 20 points a day sitting in an air-conditioned office, because the collar does all the work for you. One of the rants that I tend to go on is a lot of times because people aren't doing as much field work, like the hard, sweaty, your vehicle breaks down, you're stuck in the mud, like all of that stuff. And you're not seeing often the environment that the animal's in to understand the decision it makes. You're looking at a series of data points from your office, maybe overlaying them in Google Earth and identifying what trees they're under. But why they moved to the west instead of the east? If they're sitting under a tree for 3 days, like why is that? Are they injured? Did they make a kill? There are accelerometers. Okay, they ran, but were they running from a predator or were they hunting? If so, what did they hunt? Did they actually kill something? All of these things are up for interpretation. And unless you are on the ground doing And the observations, your interpretations may not be ecologically relevant. And that's problematic.
Yeah.
I don't think everyone's like that. And, there's a lot of people doing great work and everything. But I think that there's a tendency now where it's hard. It's hard being in the field. It's hard paying your dues in that way. And there's so much data available now that I think it's easy to kind of just take that data, do a bunch of modeling with it, overlay it on a map and think that you got the whole picture. And there's something missing.
Well, I would also think the amount of time you spent, like just days walking, it does do something different to you than looking at your phone or your computer.
Yeah.
You're so in it in such a different way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because, that experience, I had some other experiences, but that was by far the hardest. And when I look at the guys who came before me, and that like Craig Packer, Lawrence Frank, Paul Funston, George Schaller, Ulis Karanth, like all these giants ahead of me, like I have a deep appreciation for what they did for years before me. And, so I'm sort of like the tail end of that kind of line. And then there's all the people coming up after me that had the GPS collars, that had the cameras, that had all of that stuff. And so there was sort of a break between those. And I feel really, really privileged to have come up when I did. I really have such a deep appreciation for those people that did that work.
Right.
And what it took.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so with all your years of leopards, what did you learn in terms of coexistence?
Leopards are extremely intelligent, and they can live anywhere. They can live, and they can feed on just about anything. So like when I was in South Africa, I heard stories of leopards living under the bleachers in like soccer stadiums, eating the rats that were eating people's like leftover popcorn and stuff. There was a study, or there was a news story when I was in Kenya. I studied African wild dogs and lions in Kenya under Rosie Woodruff and Lawrence Frank. And when I was there was like this story in the news about this guy transporting a leopard in the back of his truck in a cage, and he put a tarp over it. It was late at night. He stopped in some neighborhood in the middle of Nairobi and went to bed, came back the next morning, lifts the tarp up a little bit, and there's a hole this big, and the leopards escaped. So then there was all this stuff, and leopard is loose in Nairobi, and then the Kenya Wildlife Service set 5 traps around that neighborhood, and they caught 4 leopards, and not a single one of them was the one that escaped. So they're extremely intelligent. They're highly adaptable. We don't even know most of the time where they are and when they're around. They're very difficult to manage against, because even if you put them in your cattle in enclosures and things, like if there's like a gap the size of like the head of that leopard, it can get in, So the biggest thing is just, and this goes for like all the predators, honestly, like because most of the conflict comes from livestock losses, small stock like sheep and goats, and then cattle, mainly the calves that are like below 7-8 months. Because once they're like above 8 months, they're too big for a leopard to take. So putting them in an enclosure that is strong, so that can be thick, like thorn branches that are really packed tight, that go all the way to the ground, that are high enough that it makes it difficult even for a leopard to jump in. And then having a strong gate, because, even having a piece of tin or something on a hinge, or like really strong branches, and then having people around herding those small stock. As long as there's people around, leopards might not take a chance, or if they do, you can chase them off. And then often having like some guard dogs, and they don't have to be the biggest, toughest dogs, but just dogs that like can sense when the leopard is there and bark and like alert people to their presence. And that, for the most part, can keep leopards at bay. And there have been experiments done. Colleagues that I used to work with at Wild and Trust in Botswana, they have like a biochemical lab, and they're using this chemical to test to see if they can keep leopards away from farming areas. Similar to what I was trying to do like a long time ago, but they thought of all sorts of innovative ideas like how to deliver it and everything. And it seems that they're making some progress on it.
And how do you go from leopards to now?
This current project started in 2014 in response to devastating poisoning events that were targeting lions along the northern edge of the Okavango Delta. A friend of mine, Vince Shacks, who was studying crocodiles in the northern Okavango, was finding these dead vultures everywhere. 40 dead vultures, 60, 80 dead vultures. And there was all these poisoning events targeting lions. And he called me up and he just said, I know you're a carnivore guy. Like, we had become friends from my time in Botswana already. And he said, like, somebody's got to do something. Like, they're targeting lions, but it's an ecological disaster up here. Endangered vultures, like other scavengers, insects, birds, like everything was going down. And I found out after talking to different lodges that about half the lions in that area were killed that year, like up to 30 lions. Whole prides, males, females, cubs. Yeah. I mean, it was
all poisoned.
Yes. It poisoned and shot. So I said, all right, I've had these ideas I've always wanted to try. I got a grant from National Geographic's Big Cats Initiative. I had a graduate student, Eric Lafleur at UMass. We hired a couple local guys. And we said, let's take a compassionate approach to this. If we march into that village and we start trying to persecute people for using poison, something that's very illegal, but nobody's going to talk to us. We're not going to find out where the poison came from. We're not going to be able to shut anything down. We should take the approach that people are using poison because they're desperate, because they see no other alternative. And so let's come up with an approach that's going to give people alternatives, understanding the system a bit better, and maybe we can help somehow. And the first thing I realized in talking to people is that they said lions are bad. Lions are a conflict species. They're all the same. It's like they don't have a brain. They're just a killing machine, like how people think of sharks and other things.
And wolves.
And wolves. And what I know from my own work, and anybody who has a pet knows that each animal is an individual. And so with lions, yeah, there are some that are aggressive, but some are very shy. Some are curious, some kill cattle, and some don't. And so what I wanted to do was individualize those lions and share their stories with people in the village.
Go back a tiny bit.
Yeah.
Because first of all, how many people are in this village that you're showing up that you're saying, like, we're going to make the lions into individuals? Like, how does this go down? And what was the reaction?
So in our area along the northern Okavango, there's 5 villages. Each village has like between 1 and like 4,000 people.
Okay.
So they're pretty small. So we go to the village and we're talking to people. We dart lions. We put satellite tracking collars on them. And then we went to the villages and we started having naming ceremonies. So we said, okay, we researchers are not going to name the animals. These are your animals in your country, in your area. These animals belong to you. So we want you to give them a name. Now, in previous projects where I worked on, researchers name them after like their favorite uncle, or, I've worked on projects where they named animals after like varieties of wine, like Chardonnay and Merlot and stuff. And then you talk to farmers and local people and they don't really have a connection to what you're talking about. So it's not important for me to have a connection with the animal. It's important for the people in the village to have a connection. If they don't have a connection, they'll think nothing of using poison or shooting them.
Sure.
So if they give them a name, then that creates just the practice of naming something creates a connection that is hard to break. And so to answer your question, we had a National Geographic film crew out with us after we had been working there for a couple of years. And we interviewed one of the most well-respected people in the village of Gonatsocha, one of the villages where we work. His name is Mr. Kadizora. I don't even I don't call him by his first name. I call him Mr. Carezor. That's like how much respect he has, in the village. And so we interviewed him, and the interviewer said, "So what do you think about naming these lions? Like, what's your general opinion of it?" And he said, "To be honest, I didn't like it at first. We don't name wild animals, and lions are our enemies. And we only name domestic animals." He said, "But now we've named them, and they're like our children, and we have to protect them." And that was far more powerful than anything that I was expecting to come from our program. I mean, that's a very deep, much deeper connection than I thought. So in these naming ceremonies over the years, I mean, we've named like close to 40 lions. We have 14 collars that are working currently. Some of the lions survive, some of them don't. And some of the names are really beautiful. Like one of the first names that was given is Mayenga, which is like sort of decorated by the gods, that kind of thing. There are others, Nduragombo, which means the farmer. Some are named after place names like Gombo Island or whatever. Some of the names are really negative. We had one, Kufa Kuduze, which means if you come for my cattle, I will find you. We have one, Mboranda Kure, which means like the one who kills and eats you. I mean, yeah, not quite what we're looking for, but right. But honestly, like these names, it's almost like a temperature check on the relationship between how people feel about the lions. So it gives us an idea of like where their head's at. If they're giving these negative names, like, okay, like there's a lot of tension here, and we need to up our outreach in our game. The best name to me was Shedepatira, which means the one who belongs to us. And it really like got at the idea that like people felt that these animals belong to them and they're not just out there, whatever. So through this, we do the naming, we put the collars on, and then we ended up working with colleagues from the University of Siegen in Germany to develop a first of its kind lion alert system. Now, people do different kinds of alert systems. Ours is a little bit different in the way that it's used. Our colleagues are part of a department for socioinformatics. This is a field I'd never heard of. I didn't even know what they were talking about. But basically, it's a communication system like with people. So they work in places all over the world with these systems. So one of the early things that they did was like for dementia patients, they put a tracking device. And so when if somebody with dementia leaves their property, it triggers like an alert to the family and the police. And then you can use that alert to track your loved one who's in the park or in a store or something and bring them home, right? So like it uses this like virtual fence or geofence. We learned about their program because their director came to visit Botswana. He happened to be staying at a place near where we work, got into conversations with him. And so he said, we've always wanted to do something in the wildlife space. And we didn't really know the entry point, but we were doing something where we were on the computer. We had something programmed into the collars. We'd get a notification. We'd look on Google Earth. We'd get the GPS. We would find which village was closest. We would call a few people and then ask them to call their neighbors. I mean, like labor intensive, arduous, like you're getting these alerts in the middle of the night, like it's really disruptive for all sorts of reasons. What they did was they set up an alert system where it's not programmed in the collar, but there's a computer program, and they developed this like cloud-based algorithm that we could set up these virtual fences around any cattle post or homestead or village. Any size we want, we can adjust it. We can move them around. We can have 10,000 if we want. We could have 2. Currently, we have like about 30 of them set up. There's a radius of about 3 kilometers for each cattle post, 5 kilometers for each village. If a lion breaches that virtual fence, an alert is immediately sent to the cell phones of the people that live within that virtual fence.
Wow.
With the name of the lion and how far away it is. So if it breaches that thing and it's 2.5 kilometers away, somebody gets a notification on their phone. Shedepatira is 2 kilometers from your home. And then because everybody has cell phones there, right? They're living in houses made of thatch and sticks and mud, but they all have cell phones. So they get the alert and they can get up and do something. They can take preventative action. They can bring their cattle in. They can fortify their enclosure for the cattle. They can light small fires. They can take out one of those like plastic horn vuvuzelas and blow it to chase the lion away. They can call their neighbors that aren't part of the system to try to reduce the conflict. So in the last 5 years, we've delivered over 50,000 alerts. We have 389 people signed up to receive alerts across those 5 villages. It's been quite interesting, like the feedback we've gotten. Like almost 90% of the people feel it's beneficial. More than half of the people take action when they receive an alert. A lot of people receive alerts in the middle of the night. They may not have even a flashlight. So some people get the alerts and they just go back to bed because they're like, there's a lion out there. A lot of people don't even know where their cattle are.
Right.
And so they just sort of, I'll deal with it in the morning, something like that. So conflict still persists.
Is it a lot less?
It's hard to say, honestly, because like in the early years, as we were just getting started, we were just getting to know people. Not everybody reports conflict to us. COVID happened. It just really slowed down our outreach quite a bit. We couldn't even hold meetings. Like Botswana took COVID very seriously. There were curfews, alcohol bans, like all sorts. You could not have a gathering with people even outside, that kind of stuff. So as we're starting to rebuild our connection with the community over the last few years, our outreach has been incredible. And we've gotten a lot more conflict records now. So it's like, is there more conflict? Is our outreach improved that we're getting more reports, even though the levels were the same? Like that, those kinds of questions is hard to tease out.
Sure.
The point is there's still a lot of conflict. So we started a response team. So members of our team, we all receive the alerts. So members of our team go into a Land Cruiser. It could be 2 a.m. They pick up a volunteer from the village. There's a short list of volunteers. Some of them are ready to go. And then we go and we intercept that lion. We find where it is. And then we use firecrackers and other noisemakers. And we've done it about 30 times now. And the lions on average retreat about 6 kilometers within the first few hours of encountering our team. So they're running away. The other thing that this helps with is that people in the villages know that we're going out. So instead of grabbing their rifle and tracking down the lion, they say, okay, I know that Claus is here and they're going to help. The volunteer that comes with us the next morning, they tell all their friends and relatives, oh, I was just out with, you won't believe what we were shooting firecrackers and the lions ran and, this kind of thing. So it doesn't even have, at that point, it doesn't even have to come from us. It comes from like word of mouth in the village. That team occasionally has encountered hunting parties, people going out with rifles, with dogs, and we drive up to them and they say, where are you going? Well, we hear this, Mariri, this big male is nearby, and say, actually, guys, we're out to find Mariri. Like we'll take care of it. And I say, okay. And then they go home. So I'd imagine just through that, we've saved many, many lions and probably people, because oftentimes lion attacks happen when people are hunting them on foot. Not when people are just going about their business. Lions leave people alone. They're afraid of them. But if they're relentlessly followed and they feel cornered, that's when they lash out. So that's sort of like the technology piece of our program. But what we really realized early on is that the primary issue, and the reason why conflict is so high, is because people in our area do not look after their cattle at all. We put satellite trackers on domestic cattle and found that they would walk 15, 17 kilometers away from the village on their own.
In a day?
Yeah. In the middle of the Okavango, in the middle of lion territory. The owners have no idea where they are, sometimes for days or even weeks at a time. So you say, like, so how many cattle do you have? And they say, oh, I'm not sure. So, how do you not know? Well, I haven't seen them in 2 weeks. You haven't seen them in 2 weeks. I thought, so what does cattle mean to you? Oh, they're my bank account. They're my social wealth. The more cattle I have, the more important I am in the village. Okay, but you're not, is there a herder with them? Well, no. It's like, well, then for my brain, like, does not compute.
Right.
So what's going on here? I said, well, why aren't you looking after them if that's the case? And but our cattle aren't worth very much in the market. Botswana is divided up by fences. And these fences were installed in the 80s, 90s to manage disease risk. People outside of the wildlife areas, outside of the fence, are in the green zone where there are commercial farms that can sell their beef to the European Union and other international markets. If you're inside the fence with wildlife, then your cattle are susceptible to disease risk, foot and mouth disease, and other diseases from wildlife. And so you cannot sell the beef in a wider market. So people say, like, why look after them? They're actually not worth very much. Say, okay, this is something that I can try to figure out. If we give people greater market access, then there might be an opportunity to look after them a little bit better. So we decided to start a communal herding program. We brought facilitators from the African Center for Holistic Management in Zimbabwe. In our area, in our villages, because people don't look after their cattle, they overgraze the area so badly that they're creating erosion, desertification, and other environmental problems. So if we do planned grazing in large herds, we can actually mimic the movement of large wild herbivores like buffalo, zebra, wildebeest, that these grasses co-evolved with. So cattle can actually be part of the solution. When cattle overgraze and causes environmental damage, that topsoil gets blown into the atmosphere. All that carbon goes into the atmosphere. You can actually trap carbon in the topsoil with strong root systems of perennial grasses that can be encouraged by good grazing practices. In the wild, buffalo keep moving because predators like lions and hyenas keep them moving. Their hoof action breaks up the soil. They leave fertilizer in their dung, like all of these things. Like, we can do that same thing with cattle. So when we approached people, we said, all right, we did this training about eco-literacy, water retention in the soil, managing diseases in cattle, managing predation risk, all this stuff. Who's interested? And we found the first village in all of Botswana, Eretsa, that was willing to try. So we brought cattle together. I hired a rangeland ecologist to lead the program. We brought together a bunch of cattle. It was a drought year in 2019, so it was a bigger challenge than we could handle. And so it sort of modulated itself to the point where we had 140 cattle. We hired 6 herders. We trained them in rangeland ecology, basic veterinary practices. We vaccinated cattle for things the government didn't, like botulism, black quarter, liver fluke, whatever. So they were healthy. And then we brought in these mobile lion or predator-proof enclosures that are basically canvas sheets. If the animals can't see in and the cattle can't see out, even though we see tracks of lions walking around them at night, we don't have any losses.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and we haven't had any losses to lions in like 2.5 years now within that system. So we see
incredible.
That. I'm really proud of it. It's making sense. So first of all, in these herds, and now we have 3 herds with like almost 800 cattle in 2 different villages, but we have essentially no losses to predators. So there's actually no reason to kill a lion if you're in the program.
And I know that no one's killing lions anymore, but has most people's attitudes around lions changed?
Somewhat. And we have had a couple, we've had 2 cases of losses of lions in the last 2 years. We haven't had a single lion poison in 5 years. So like that's
big.
a big deal. What we've determined in the last couple of years is that the lion population is growing fast. So at the end of 2022, that was like our last big case of people going after and killing lions. And the population that we knew of was about 45 lions in our area. Last year, after like extensive outreach, going to the lodges, like calling guides and managers in the lodges, doing presentations in the villages every 2 months, gathering all that data, we had more lion sightings last year than in the previous 7 years combined, like recorded. And we recorded not 45 in 2002, but 104 individual lions that we learned about. Now, some of those are transients. They're young animals that are dispersing, but we had over 40 lions born and surviving in the last 2 years. And previously, when people would shoot lions, often it was a territorial male. Then new males come in, depose whoever is left. Then they want to start having their own cubs immediately. So then they do infanticide or killing the young of the female so that she gets into reproductive condition as fast as possible. So what we were having like from basically 2014 to 2023 is occasionally you'd have some cubs surviving, but cub mortality was almost 70% because these males were getting hammered every year, every other year by people in the villages. And in the last 2 years, we've had a level of stability in those prides that many of these cubs are surviving and joining the pride, and recruitment is higher. And so now people are looking around and they're seeing a lot more signs of lion. And so they're starting to get nervous again. So now what we need to do is expand the herding program. The village to our east, Betsa, has already pledged 1,000 cattle. That's basically enough for 3 herds. We have another cattle post to our west, Ao 2, which has 800 cattle that they want to start a herding program there. So we're trying to raise money so that we can support the expansion of this program, reduce conflict, reduce, the hunting parties from going out, and supporting people as best we can. But there's a lot of tension now because there's a lot more lions and there's still a lot of people that don't actively care for their cattle. And the thing is, like, it takes time. And sometimes, when you feel like you got something that's working and you just want everybody to just embrace it and take it up and let's go and like all this kind of thing, we're in these communities and there's a lot of deliberation. You sit under a tree with the leaders of that village for hours, and you field all sorts of questions. There's distrust. There's, people just want to understand, what exactly, how it all works. Not everybody's present. You have to have these conversations many times. There's all sorts of like political factions within these villages. People have different practices, different beliefs, different family feuds going back generations, like all sorts of stuff going on that you're stepping into. And you have no idea like what's going on. And then, as people tell their neighbors, that's the thing that's really going to sell it. As an organization, we started out in 2014 with a grad student and 2 employees and a like $50,000 budget. Now we're an organization of 41. 95% of our organization is African born. It's just myself and 1 other employee. She's from Spain. The rest are from Africa. Of the 41, 37 are from Botswana, most of them from the villages where we work. Our leadership is 55% women. We believe strongly in finding the right people for the position. And it just turns out that a lot of the people that have applied for jobs with us that have the best qualifications happen to be women. And it's really, in the best way, changed the way we, approach our work. So that's been great too. As we grow, we're able to kind of see this, development across our own organization, but even within the communities that we work with.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew, for this.
Yeah.
And for sharing and for coming today. But yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you.
To learn more about Andrew and to learn about claws, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and could do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. I would like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knudsen, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polke-Link, Hannah Gabrielson, Bethany Jones, and Anna Kalner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.